Hi again, Shaka Hislop for another of our conversations around race and racism in the game. And today, I can't tell you how delighted I am to be joined by Iffy Onuora and Wes Morgan.
This is 25 for 25, a Show Racism the Red Card podcast. Make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
Two players who I know well. One, and Iffy, I'm dating you here, I've shared a field with back in the day. Wes far more contemporary than us, Iffy. Wes himself, over 750 games, Nottingham Forest, most famously for Leicester City in winning the title back in 2016, which thrilled all of football, and of course played internationally for Jamaica as a Trinidad and Tobagonian. I remember that time particularly well. If you played Huddersfield, Gillingham, Swindon, you played with Sheffield United, managed Swindon, Gillingham, and Lincoln, I think as an assistant.
Yes.
At least one of those. You know, with the Premier League, head of diversity and inclusion, am I right in saying?
Yeah.
Gentlemen, thanks for joining me. It's a pleasure to share this space with both of you, given everything you've done, everything you've given to the game, and how you still contribute. If you let me jump straight in with you and your current role with the Premier League. Tell me what it entails. What's your 9 to 5 look like?
Oh, that's very hard. I'll try and sum it up as quickly as possible. So I head the race equality and inclusion. So we have campaigns, particularly around No Room for Racism, which culminate in match rounds in October in the spring, and very much in a question of focusing on all the anti-discrimination work. Of course, a lot of this happened as a result of George Floyd in 2020. And through that, we've got an advisory group, which is delighted to say Wes sits on as well. That helps check and challenge a lot of the work we're doing. So yeah, it's leading on that. Even things like taking the knee, we go around on the eve of the season, just speak to the players and the squads. Do they want to keep doing it? Last year, we reduced it in terms of the days they did it. That seemed to work well, even though I know people had different views on that. But I think we future-proofed it because I'm hoping and expecting that players will still want to do that next year. And we've actually got the last round of fixtures where players will be taking the knee as well. So we think it's important not to focus on that. Lots of other issues in football, as we know, so much changes in between, but we want to keep focused on the areas that engage me, and anti-discrimination, pathways for players, pathway for coaches, and referees now as well. We're working on a lot of those plans as well. So we're just trying to make the pitch, off the pitch, Shaka, as diverse, as inclusive as it is on the pitch, and increasingly so.
And thanks for that. I mean, it's much needed. And Wes, let me jump to you. And while where I jokingly talk about the good old days when Iffy and I were playing, certainly in terms of race and race relations, while there's been a lot of improvement, you were an active player. You retired in 2021, so you lived through, you played through that George Floyd moment that Iffy speaks of, and the players wanting to take the knee, wanting to show solidarity with their teammates of color. Talk to me a little bit about your own experiences with Leicester City and what the dressing rooms were like during that time, during the pandemic, during the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, and how the game spearheaded so many of its own efforts.
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, it's a tough time for everyone involved in football. And there was plenty of meetings around, the George Floyd thing and what can be done. And from the captain's point of view, we all came together. We were starting a meeting. We all came together and we wanted to show solidarity and make a stance. And we came up with the Black Lives Matter slogan on the arm of the shirts, and the Premier League supported what the players wanted to do, which was great. But yeah, first of all, it came from the captains, and then we had to get the support of the team, the players in the team, and everyone brought into the idea. We want to, show stance, put that symbol on the shirt, and take the knee to show, we don't condone what we saw, and we're together in this, and we're showing solidarity in this moment. And Premier League were great, the football governing bodies were great. They brought into what we wanted and supported us fully.
But of course, it wasn't. The support wasn't universal. Most famously, and you heard from both Boris Johnson and Priti Patel, who were active in government at the time, and that was admittedly more around the English national team. But also, once you had fans coming back into stadia, famously, a number of fans started to boo, and there was a lot of pushback. What were some of the conversations that you all were having within the dressing rooms once those issues started to raise the kind of pushback that we saw?
Yeah, I think it was important to still show togetherness. Like you mentioned, some noise came from the government. I think they kind of was worried that we was making some type of political statement. And we always reiterated, this is nothing to do with politics. This is nothing to do with, radicalization or anything along those lines. We saw something that was wrong, and we wanted to make a stance against it. And that's as simply how it goes and how it was. And when the crowd started coming back into the stadium, it wasn't all received well. I think that's fair to say. I think over time, majority of supporters brought into it, and then eventually everyone did, which was great. And sometimes, with these things, when something new gets introduced, it's not all welcomed wholeheartedly. And it did take some time, but I think, the majority of the crowds was in support of what we stood for. And, you're always going to get a small number of people that don't. But I think as time went on, we did it for over the course of a season. Everyone bought into the idea, and if anything, it ignited conversation around the subject. And towards the end of it, the actual impact wasn't as great, but the conversation was still there, and I think that was the most important part of it, because with conversation becomes an opportunity to speak about it and see what can be done, and that's what the whole point of taking the knee was about.
There is a couple of really good points there. I think that conversations were sparked by those actions, much needed conversations. And while yes, there was pushback from a minority, I think you saw kind of a more vocal majority speak out and applaud the players as time went on. And I thought those were kind of important developments to kind of show who the game is and what we stand for. If you talk about going around to clubs before the season start to discuss continue taking of the knee on different occasions on certain days. How have those conversations changed over the last 12 months, given that players no longer take the knee before every single game? What are some of the hurdles? What are some of the pushbacks? What are some of the successes that you found in your own role?
Yeah, and just before I answer that bit, Shaka, and I won't forget, just to underscore what Wes is saying about opposition and things like this, we know that always happens. You look at any and Black Lives Matter matters was a human rights movement. It wasn't political. But BLM have never put up candidates in a local election or anything political like that. It's a human rights movement. So I think there was lots of people at work trying to turn into something different. And if you look at any human rights movement, whether it's anti-apartheid in South Africa, and I'm old enough to remember these, civil rights, a bit older than me in the States, any of those movements, look where we are now. No one in South Africa, no one says the ANC or Black South Africans don't have rights, but they said that a generation ago. So any movements of progress, and you can talk about women's suffragette, the women's right to vote, comes with hurdles and people who stand in the way of progress. So every bit of progress is always hard won. So in terms of what we're trying to do, it's always hard won. people look back 10 years ago, oh yeah, we're right to do that. I always try and say, no, be on the right side of history now. Don't wait 10
Yeah.
years and go, oh, that was the right thing to do. Be on the right side of history now. So obviously I don't say give that message, going back to your question, to the players, but we remind them that the Premier League is the most watched league in the world, goes out to every country except 4 or 5 in the world. So the impact of taking the knee, even though it became samey to them, and we talked about that, don't think it doesn't carry weight. It carries massive impact. Back in 2020, everyone was taking the knee. Parliamentarians were taking the knee. Trade unions were taking the knee. The only people take the knee now? Premier League players. Only
Right.
one. So they've stayed. They've stayed the course. So what we were trying to do when we spoke to them last summer is, because the starters to get some feedback about taking the knee every time, we said, well, come on, what are the significant dates in the calendar? So we looked at the first game of the season, fresh and new. Yeah, let's go for that. And then we had our October, Black History Month, the 2 match rounds there. Let's keep those ones. That's 3. Especially with the World Cup, when it resumes again, why don't we have a Boxing Day? That's 4. We had 2 more in the spring, then the 2 more match rounds of Infinitism in February. That's 6. And then the 7th one, this Sunday, the last game of the season. So they felt like significant dates in the football calendar. And I think that the good thing about that is saying, and I'd be really surprised if we do the visits in July and early August, whether the players think, oh, that's too much. I think we've got it just right. I don't know what Wes thinks. I think we've got that just about right in terms of people going, no, I can buy into that. Just moments, just to keep the conversation going. And it was around the mantra, less but more. Less times but more impact was the way we were looking at it. And gradually, when you put that to players, and they'll come up with their own things. Like James Ward-Prowse, I'll share this with you at Southampton. We're having a conversation with him on the captain's thing. And James said, oh no, I played with his little boy in the back garden, and his boy wanted to take the knee before they started playing football. So we made a little video of him talking about that, and we used them on our channel. So it's keeping that message alive in a way that people find can feel comfortable with and understand its significance. And once you put it like that and make out the players really, we really appreciate them, they should appreciate their own solidarity as players. Remember our generation, Shaka, we'd say things like this and you'd get shunned. You know, you couldn't say things like that now. You'd be labelled a troublemaker. So in some ways, I'm proud of this generation, but in some ways, I'm a little bit jealous as well, because they've got a little bit more of a platform than we did. So I see my job as encouraging them to be themselves, the impact that people like Marcus and Troy and Wes and people like that. And my job, I think, is to just support that and make it relevant as we go on to season after season.
Oh, there's so much there, and so much I can add to. First of all, just in terms of starting conversations, it's something that we are sure recently Red Card really found a huge benefit in. Young kids coming into schools asking and talking about why their team, why Mo Salah, or where's whoever it will, we're taking the knee, and kids having those conversations, not just with their parents, not just with their teachers, but also in playgrounds. And I think there's huge value to that, to add to that James Ward-Prowse story that you just told. Kids see this and understand the significance or the symbolism of it, and it sparks significant conversations. Whereas if he spoke about it there, again, and now in your role as an advisory capacity, does the 7 days feel like too much? Does it feel like not enough? What give me your, as we jokingly said at the start, your most recent in dressing rooms? What do you feel the overwhelming feeling and sympathies would be like?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, when we've in the past, when we've had to, do something and show some type of initiative, it's fully supported. And I know it was pretty fresh at the time, and I was in the dressing room 2 years ago, but in my dressing room, is probably what I can speak about is, it's fully supported. I spoke to the players, spoke about, we've got this idea, it'd be great if everyone's on board with it, and the response was absolutely, whatever you need. We're all together in this, which is exactly what you want to hear. And probably nothing less than I expect. And I think to make change, if individuals aren't buying into it, it can be difficult. But if everyone buys into the same dream, rowing in the same direction, it can make a big impact.
As we record this, we're some 2 days removed from Vinicius Junior being racially abused away at Valencia. A story that's made not just Spanish headlines, not just European headlines, but has gone global to the point where even the Brazilian president has commented on it. Now, if you spoke about the popularity of the English Premier League, the global popularity of the English Premier League, do incidents such as we saw with Vinicius Junior, will that impact Spanish football in any way? What can and should be the messaging that Spain and Spanish football learns from it?
Well, first of all, you've got to accept there's a problem, and I'm not sure they're quite at that level yet. Yeah. So a lot of pushback against him, which is a bit of gaslighting. The abuser gets abused by the people who should be making the decisions. So I need to get my head around that a little bit. And maybe, and I don't want us to pat ourselves on the back for the sake of it, but they're in a different space than us because we a little bit more history over there. And some of these things football's only reflects society. So as much as we say in our country we've had a history of immigration over centuries, even in this country, maybe less so, although they've got a Moorish tradition in Spain. But that wave we're going to be celebrating the Windrush generation this Sunday as well. That wave isn't as recent as Spanish. It's more like the last 15 years. So all these factors build into it. And I think there's a lot of denial, whereas what we found is in 2020 particularly, we were pushing at a door that needed to be pushed open a little bit. So no one in this country, they might argue about how and the when and what pace, but no one said there wasn't a problem. That was the difference here. At least we were able to do that. And it was a reminder that, and I occasionally speak to counterparts in different leagues, different countries, and I spoke to people in France and the Netherlands recently, and the MLS who came over as well, that they do see the Premier League as kind of the forerunners on this kind of thing, spearhead and wanting to know how we do our campaigns, things like this. So that gives me a bit of positivity, but I'm very careful we don't, like I say, give ourselves a slap on the back. And it also reminds me how far other countries have got to go.
Yeah.
First thing is acknowledging that there's a problem, and if you can't do that, then you've got real problems there. I'm so pleased that the Brazilian government have weighed in behind. So now we've gone into beyond the football space into the policy and political space, which is where it needs to be. And we'll see what comes of it. And again, you need to have follow through. So at least we're now getting in this country prosecutions. So we've got a protocol in this country about what happens if there's a booing, the players come off, they consult the managers, and etc., etc. And then with what we've seen since 2020, some prosecutions, not as many as we would like, but even social media. I think what I found in Spain over the last few days, listen to it, they have prosecuted, they have charged, and they haven't gone to LaLiga. But LaLiga put it through their equivalent to the CPS and hit a brick wall. They don't take it as seriously. That's the bottom line in Spain. They've not taken chance in this seriously. So
if in English football there was a similar incident, how would English football react? What would be the repercussions?
Yeah, there is a European protocol as well, so they should be aware of it. And I understand it was followed to some degree, but we have our own one. So initially, any report of abuse, stadium announcer make the play stopped. The stadium announcer makes announcements over the tannoy to say if it doesn't stop, the players will go off the pitch. If it did continue, the players would come off the pitch, and all this is done with the two managers and the captains in place. So there is established protocol. I go back to what I was saying though. You can have protocol in place. It's a bit like having a law, but no one buys into it. Then it's not fit for purpose. And I think the strength of our league is the participation rights. And again, going back to our time, Shaka, those numbers of black players has been steadily increasing, and they found that power in the games. Can you imagine if the 40+% of black players decided they weren't having this? Imagine what the teams would look like. So again, contrast that with Spain and Italy. I don't know what the numbers are, but they're significantly less than that. So you're now in the space that English football was maybe 20 years ago, and we didn't have such things as allyship or I've been abused on pitches. Now, one of my colleagues turned around and said, "Oh, that was terrible. What do you think of that?" It was just accepted as norm.
Yeah.
In a way, it's not nowadays. So we have moved on in that space, and that's why I think Spain and Italy and one or two other nations are behind, because of the participation rates and the political will to change things. If it's not there, then it won't happen. Hopefully now, in terms of what's happened with Vinicius Junior and the weight that's been brought to bear by the Brazilian government, that will start to have a debate. It won't be smooth. It'll be one step forward, two back, and all that. But hopefully, it initiates that conversation.
And Wes, let me ask, what would your advice to Vinicius be had you been his captain in the dressing room? And if we spoke about it, I always feel like as players, walking off a field is an absolute last resort. It goes against everything that we're there for. And so for a player to walk off the field, and Carlo Ancelotti is saying that Vinicius Junior asked about coming off, and Carlo's advice to him is, "You're the victim here. You aren't the one who should be paying the price." But when authorities have failed at every step as they have, I rather than putting you in Vinicius Junior's shoes, I'm going to put you in shoes of the Real Madrid captain. Well, what's your advice? What do you say? What do you do?
Yeah, it's interesting if you speak, because he obviously knows a little bit more about the protocols than me. And I think first and foremost, what are the protocols? If I was the captain, and that happened to one of my players, I want to know exactly what the protocols are so I can make the right decision. But first and foremost, if you're on the receiving end of that type of abuse, you're going to need support. You're going to want your teammates around you supporting you. And whatever decision you think's right to make, you want the support of the players with you. So, my role as the captain would be to, obviously console the player, offer support, and look at what options can be done. But it's disappointing to hear it don't seem that there's no real clear protocol or process for that happening. And like if he said, we're in the Premier League, those protocols are in place, and other leagues look at us as maybe the pioneers in this field and know what to do. So it seems like Spain's just very behind in that sense.
And if while English football is a whole lot better by that measure, it's by no means perfect. You spoke about the pipelines that the Premier League and in conjunction with the PFA and English football at large are trying to develop to bring through more coaches, to bring through more referees. Talk to me a little bit about what that looks like. I'm sitting on the sidelines and hear somebody speaking about pipelines. It's all well and good, but I'm not quite sure exactly what that is or what that looks like.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Across all of those, so referees, coaching, and playing, which is more like the South Asian community, because that's a slightly different conversation about South Asian participation. But around executives and coaching and refereeing, we have got specific schemes in place to develop that pipeline. Some of the coaching ones have been in place for 3 or 4 years. In fact, I was working on one of the coaching pipelines before I joined the Premier League back in 2019. And so we're about 3 or 4 years into that. And it's interesting, that's helped with the numbers, and we've tracked some of those coaches gone into the clubs. That's helped at academy level. So our next conversation is, what can we do at the more senior level? The 18s and above into the first team picture. Can we do something similar to what we've done? We know what works and what doesn't. So again, that feels like it might be a challenge, but we're here. We're not here to mess about, are we? We need to.
Yeah.
We need to face head-on challenges. Executives is a matter one. I'm pleased that Wes is here. Wes is on one of our programs where we're trying to increase through a pilot scheme initially, and then hopefully a further rollout to include the number of black executives in the in football across all 4 divisions. We'll both know Les Ferdinand. He's probably the only person of colour as an executive in the league. Maybe 1 or 2 others. So that smacks of a structural problem as well. So we're trying to change some things on a small scale, but hopefully they'll have big impacts. That visibility piece. So yes, we'd love to get Wes and the rest of the cohort in situ in places, but it's actually the visibility of having them in places. It's why we looked at someone like a Patrick Vieira, and why everyone's so disappointed when he loses his job. As much for Patrick Vieira, but the visibility of that single black manager in the Premier League, and then we know the job's unstable anyway. God forbid I'd ever do that again, by the way. But it's more the impact. We had one shining light almost. Had a great season with Palace, and you almost hold on to him as evidence. Look, there's a black man position. A Premier League can do it. Loses his job, and we've lost that kind of golden halo thing with him. So, and it hurts more when there's just a Patrick Vieira. What you want black players and coming to the end of the career and coaches, you want them to have the opportunities to fail or succeed every much as the white counterparts. So that's the challenge we've all got. It won't listen. There's no such thing as easy wins, and we've all got to dig in for the long haul. But my job, I think, is to try and create pathways that will hopefully bear fruit as we go on the next decade or so. And I do think we have made inroads in the last couple of years, and it's my job not to get complacent, not to get people get complacent and sit back and think, oh, well, we've got a few more coaches now. No. We keep going.
And what about referees? I can't think of a black referee since we were already.
Exactly.
Again, refereed where we will play.
15 years, Shaka, 15 years coming up, because there was an article in The Athletic, 15 years. And really, again, that's a terrible reflection on the game, about the decision makers at the top. And I will put it like that because it doesn't reflect well. And especially in the league now, where there's 40-odd% black players and there's no referees, add to the lack of black coaches, add to the lack of black executives, add to lack of support staff. There's very few, in terms of the analysts, the sports scientists. That whole visibility thing is really missing. So we're trying to supercharge that. And again, it's probably only a few years since we've all kind of, well, not all of us, but I think many people woke up to the fact there was a problem. So you're trying to battle on so many fronts to give the game the visibility. And going back to the Vinicius Junior thing just for 1 minute, the Spanish should have some self-interest in this, because then the biggest producer of footballers has always been Brazil and the South America and Africa to some degree. They've done all the data around that. If now Brazilian players are getting the message Spain's not welcome, where would you go? He's a superstar, Vinicius Junior. But who's used to say Vinicius Junior 5 years ago now wouldn't have thought, oh, not for me. I'll go to the Premier League instead. It feels like they're trying to do something. So Spain really do need to wake up on that. And I think that's a little bit of a selling point on our part, but not so much that we need to go and give ourselves garlands as well.
So I once referred to myself as a reluctant role model, and my wife told me off. She's like, what kind of term is that? Well, what exactly what you're saying? But my point at the time was that I have become a role model. Not that I set out to be one, but I just kind of found myself in that position. Not trying to do that, but from the time being the idiot that I am, so now I take every opportunity to call myself a reluctant role model. Now, whereas I'll tell that story. You're only the second black captain to lift the Premier League trophy. Patrick Vieira being the first. How have you dealt with that weight of being I say hesitantly, reluctant role model, of people looking up to you and recognizing what you represent in terms of for black footballers, for all our representation? Again, you're only the second black captain. How have you found that role, that responsibility?
Yeah, well, I completely understand what you mentioned with your terminology there. Reluctant role model. probably feel a bit like that myself, which means I don't go out there to try and be an example, try and create waves, but with success and achievements, there's that automatic limelight that comes on you, and like it or not, you have to react to that. And people react in different ways. If you know me, I'm pretty laid back type of guy, and I like to just go and do my business without causing much noise. But I think one of my personal passions is to try and help and create diversity, inclusion in different areas in the football, which is why I work with the Premier League on the BPAC committee, and I find it very interesting and very challenging at the same time, because you want to do loads and you want to help out as much as you can, and it don't go at the pace you want, but as long as you see small changes and small improvement, it gives you hope, and that's definitely what I've seen since I've been working with the group. And I like to probably use my position and my influence to try and make those changes, and there's pressures with being successful and being one of the only black captains to win the Premier League. But at the same time, I'm in a position of power, so I've got to try and use it to try and make the positive changes.
So that's the short term. What is in store for you more in the medium term? Where do you see your own career path taking you?
Yeah, could just continue to help and try and improve how things appear at the moment in terms of diversity. And then for me personally, to get into that executive space and be in a position where, instead of kind of asking for change and hoping it happens, I'll be in a position to actually make the decisions and make the changes, and, help how it looks and change the numbers as much as possible. But I think you only can do that from the top. So that's my aim, to get into positions of power to make meaningful change.
That's fantastic to hear, and good luck with it. A few years ago, there was a lot of discussion about the Rooney Rule, as it was phrased over here in the US, and it took a similar naming in the UK. Does that play a part? What do you make of that kind of ruling, that institutionality to it?
It's really interesting. The history, obviously, I don't know the previous history of the renewal, but we were in the room. So this is going back nearly 20 years when Ricky Hill, remember Ricky Hill?
Yes.
Shaka, of course, very outstanding footballer. He'd been living in the States, and he told us about this rule that was just coming in 2005 about getting more African-American coaches in the NFL. So we thought, okay, and what do you call it, the Rooney Rule? So it's become part of the lexicon. And then, like you said, it took to 2016 in the EFL, not the Premier League, to get a version of that in, and it's still there in some form or other. In fact, speaking to my counterparts at the EFL, they're looking to tighten it up a little bit, so that becomes quite a part of the fabric now about recruitment. And a lot of this is about recruitment. As you know, football clubs are kind of used to doing their own thing. They're not public bodies like in health, education, where they have to be guided by a set of rules. So it's getting football to get itself in line with other sectors around open, transparent recruitment. So football's still got some way to do that. As we know about football and a lot of industries, it's kind of network-based. Who's your friend of a friend? What we say about the golf club mentality. That's how we get recruitment. So it's getting football to embrace more transparency. And any study will show you, whether it's Harvard Business School or McKinsey, will show that more diverse companies and environments achieve better results. So there's a business case for diversity. Never mind the heights, the heart and mind. So it's getting football to appreciate that, to acknowledge that, to go with that, understand the demographics. I think we're having this conversation 20 years. Diversity as a concept in terms of population is only ever increasing. So we go back to what I was saying earlier. This is coming anyway. At some point, embrace it, go with it, and you'll get better results if you do that. So in terms of our initiatives, they're a kind of hybrid of those rules. We're not saying you have to do this when you're doing recruitment. What we're saying is, particularly people like Wes, we give them a placement at a club, and we've done this in executives and coaching. A placement at the club, they get some support with some key individuals at the club, and then the idea is it's over 2 or 3 year period, and then we see whether they can get employed afterwards. And what we found in coaching just takes some of that mystique, in terms of you've got someone already in the building. He's done well over 2 years. Why wouldn't you take him on?
Yeah.
So we have that kind of idea that takes some of the mystique. And I always say about recruitment, it's not even this job, it's the next one. You have an open, transparent process. You might not employ Shaka Hislop who comes through the door, but you might remember him. And the next time after the vacancy, you might think, tell you what, that Shaka guy, we liked him. Have we still got his details? So we're trying to re-educate football. And some of the times we sat on some of those recruitment panels, they've been really interesting. They've been as tough as some of the recruitment process itself, getting the clubs to buy into that. The better clubs have done it. Some others still got some way to go. So it's not quite the renewal, although that does take place in the EFL. But what we're finding, if you can imagine, that's a slow process. But I think there's more depth to it than that, because you're trying to change the key decision makers, their mindset about recruitment as well.
You see that exact story is Leroy Rosinha's, and how he got the manager job at Torquay United.
Yes.
He'd interviewed and was remembered. He didn't get the job when he first interviewed, but he was called back once that vacancy came about once again.
Absolutely, and we try and have different conversations with different people. So we interviewed some sporting directors, and they're obviously a lot of the key decision makers in terms of head coach appointments now. So we started to go, how do you employ? And it's amazing, they still have their little networks, which is fine for people on the network. But how do you get on the network? How do you get in their network? So there is still old school thinking. Some of the better clubs are using data. And I would argue some of the better run clubs, the Brighton, the Brentford, if you look at their whole recruitment through the club, players, C-suite, everyone through that the club, it's a lot more joined up, and it's no surprise for me. They're seeing some real wins in terms of data and appointments and new hires. So it's a challenge, and it's, like I said, it's a pretty full-on one on a day-to-day basis. But we're still in there, we're still winning or trying to win. And we'll still keep going.
Iffy, thanks a lot, man. I think that'll do it. A few years ago, I was doing an interview and giving a talk, and I referred to myself as a reluctant role model, and my wife went ballistics. What kind of term is that? I guess it was poorly phrased, but my point being that for all the things that I set out to do, or maybe have become, and the way people now see me, that was never in my mind when I first started kicking a football, when I first pulled on a pair of gloves for Reading back in the day. These things just kind of happened, and you find yourself in the limelight, you find yourself being an example, and it's an opportunity for you to do more with your own platform. Gentlemen, let me thank you both. Wes, good luck with everything that you promised, and your contributions to the game are beyond what anybody could reasonably expect, and I hope it continues in that vein. Again, as somebody who played alongside Iffy, the older generation, we know how it was. We've seen the progress that has been made over the years. We recognize the value that the current players bring to this fight against racism. Iffy, thank you very much for guiding that, for helping steer the league and the next generation of players, and giving them real voice to their concerns. I say with all sincerity, every time I have these conversations, I'm filled with so much more hope as to what the future may hold. We may not see a totally equitable game, a totally equitable society, but I feel that with gentlemen such as you involved, we continue to make steady progress. And the next generation of footballers, I'm sure, will benefit from both the work that you do, Iffy, and the example that you continue to set, Wes. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much.
Shaka. Appreciate it.
Ben.
Yes, thank you.